The desperate call. The last council meeting, High Chancellors at Foros looked out at the dying stars through the crystal dome of the Galactic Alliance's capital station. 3 systems had gone dark in the past week. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply erased from existence as if they had never been. The void swarm was methodical in its consumption, leaving nothing behind but empty space, where entire civilizations once thrived. The emergency council chamber buzzed with dozens of alien voices, each representing a species that had once thought themselves masters of the galaxy. The proud Altarians with their blue crystalline skin sat beside the insectoid hive speakers, while the gaseous nebula collective flickered in their containment suits. All of them shared the same expression of desperate fear. The Kepler defense line has fallen, announced General Vex High, his 6 arms trembling as he manipulated the holographic display. The void swarm broke through our strongest fortifications in less than 4 hours. They've adapted to every weapon we've used against them. A ripple of panic spread through the chamber. The Kepler line had been considered impregnable, defended by the combined fleets of 12 different species. If it could fall so easily, nowhere in the galaxy was safe. What about the ancient weapons? Asked Ambassador Thesis, her serpentine form coiling with anxiety. The planet killers from the old wars. We tried them at the Rigel system, Vex High replied grimly. The void creatures absorbed the energy and grew stronger. They seemed to feed on any form of power we directed them. Chancellor Zephoros closed, his ancient eyes feeling the weight of billions of lives on his shoulders. In his 900 years of life, he had seen the galaxy unite in peace, watched a species that had once warred against each other join together in harmony. Now all of that was about to end. There is one option we haven't discussed, he said quietly, his words carrying across the suddenly silent chamber. Every delegate knew what he meant. In the outer rim of the galaxy, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, lived a species that the Galactic Alliance had chosen to quarantine. Humanity had been deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable, too violent to join civilized galactic society. You cannot be serious, hissed Ambassador Thesis. The humans are primitives. They've barely achieved faster than light travel, and their entire history is nothing but warfare and destruction. They're monsters, agreed Delegate Kryn of the Peaceful Worlds Union. Their own planet is scarred by weapons that split atoms. They wage war on their own species for resources, territory, ideology. They would be more dangerous than the void swarm itself. Chancellor Zephoros nodded slowly. Yes, they are all of those things. They are violent, ruthless, and completely without mercy when they believe their survival is at stake. They have weapons we've banned, tactics we've declared war crimes, and a mindset that sees destruction as just another tool. He paused, looking around at all the frightened faces, but they win. Every conflict they've ever faced, every impossible situation, every enemy that should have destroyed them, they find a way to survive and emerge victorious. Maybe it's time we stop trying to solve this problem like civilized beings. The debate that followed was fierce and desperate. Representatives who had worked together for centuries suddenly found themselves arguing about the fundamental nature of civilization itself. The Altarians believed that seeking help from humans would corrupt their souls. The hive speakers thought it was better to die with honor than live through barbarism. In the end, desperation won by the narrowest margin. The vote was 51% in favor of contacting Earth. The message to Earth, the transmission to Earth, was simple and direct, the way human communications tended to be. The Galactic Alliance faces immediate extinction from an enemy we cannot defeat. Our combined fleets, our most advanced weapons, our greatest minds have all failed. We formally request military assistance. We offer full access to our technology, resources, and grateful alliance in exchange for aid. The response came back within 6 hours. It was even more direct. We'll help, sending 5 specialists. Do not interfere with their operations. Do not question their methods. Do not attempt to limit their actions. They will eliminate your problem. Payment terms to be negotiated after completion. That was it. No questions about the enemy, no requests for detailed intelligence briefings, no negotiations about command structure or rules of engagement. Just a promise to send 5 people to save an entire galaxy. The Alliance leadership spent the next 2 days trying to understand what kind of specialists Earth would send. Military strategists, perhaps. Scientists with revolutionary weapons technology. Diplomats who might find a way to communicate with the Void Swarm. They were wrong about everything. The arrival when the 5 human ships arrived at Alliance Central. They didn't request docking permission or follow standard identification procedures. They simply took what they wanted, forcing their way into high-security berths with technology that shouldn't have existed. Their vessels were unmarked, unregistered, and seemed to bend light around them in ways that hurt to look at directly. The humans themselves were even more disturbing. Dr. Evelyn Cross was the first to enter the council chamber. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes that belonged on a grandmother. Not someone who had been exiled from human space for creating biological weapons. She carried a simple medical bag and smiled pleasantly at the assembled aliens. Fascinating, she murmured, studying the various species with professional interest. I've never seen such biodiversity in one location. The potential applications are extraordinary. Behind her came Marcus Chen, though most beings in the room felt an irrational urge to look away from him. There was something wrong about the way he moved, the way he smiled, the way his eyes seemed to see directly into their thoughts. He had once been Earth's premier psychological warfare specialist before being imprisoned for experiments that left entire populations unable to function. Captain Rex Morrison entered next, and his presence made the air itself feel heavier. He was built like a siege weapon, all muscle and scars, with eyes that had watched planets burn from orbit. He had been court-martialed for excessive use of orbital bombardment after turning 3 rebel worlds into glass. But his methods had ended a war that might have lasted decades. Professor Sarah Voss appeared to be having a conversation with invisible companions as she walked in. The slim, disheveled woman gestured at empty air and nodded at responses only she could hear. She had created artificial intelligences so advanced and so ruthless that Earth's military had classified them as weapons of mass destruction and locked her away to prevent her from building more. The last to enter was Commander Jake Torres. Several delegates weren't sure exactly when he had arrived. One moment the doorway was empty, the next he was simply there, as if he had always been part of the furniture. He was unremarkable in every way, average height, common features, forgettable face, which made him perfect for infiltration. Work. He had been caught impersonating alien diplomats on 17 different worlds, starting wars and ending governments with equal ease. The interdescent of R. Cross smiled warmly at the assembled delegates and spoke in a voice that could have been reading children's bedtime stories. We understand you have a pest problem. Don't worry, we're very good at pest control. We've eliminated entire species before, though usually we call them diseases or invasive organisms. Chancellor Zephoros felt something cold settle in his stomach. We were hoping for military assistance, not genocide. Oh, but that's exactly what you need, Marcus Chen said, his voice carrying undertones that made several delegates unconsciously step backward. You've been thinking like civilized beings, trying to fight fairly, attempting to minimize casualties and collateral damage. That's why you're losing. Captain Morrison cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the chamber like weapons being primed. The enemy doesn't care about your rules of war. They don't worry about civilian casualties or cultural preservation. They just consume everything in their path. To beat them, you need someone willing to do the same. Professor Voss suddenly looked up from her invisible conversation. My children tell me the void creatures have a distributed intelligence network. Fascinating. I wonder if they've ever encountered a truly hostile artificial mind. The kind that doesn't just want to win, but wants to make sure its enemies suffer while losing. Commander Torres spoke for the first time, his voice completely unremarkable. We've reviewed your intelligence files. The Void Swarm has patterns, weaknesses, command structures. They just happen to be the kind of weaknesses that require immoral solutions to exploit. The silence that followed was the sound of civilized minds trying to process the impossible. These 5 humans weren't just offering to help, they were promising to solve the galaxy's greatest threat using methods that no decent being would. Consider. Dr. Cross opened her medical bag and began arranging various vials and instruments on a nearby table. Now then, we'll need biological samples from the void creatures. Don't worry about how we obtain them. We have our methods. I'll need to understand their physiology before I can design something that will make them wish they had never evolved. This is madness, whispered Ambassador This. You're talking about crimes against nature itself. Marcus Chen turned his unsettling gaze on her, and she felt her mind recoil from the contact. Nature is a luxury you can afford when you're not facing extinction. We're offering you survival. The methods we use to achieve it are not your concern. Chancellor Zephoros looked around at his fellow delegates, seeing fear and desperation warring in their faces. They had called for help, and Earth had sent them the 5 most dangerous humans in existence. Whether that would save them or damn them remained to be seen. What do you need from us? He asked finally. Nothing, Captain Morrison replied. Stay out of our way. Don't ask questions about our methods, and try not to think too hard about what we're doing. When we're finished, your Void Swarm problem will be permanently solved. And if we try to stop you... Professor Voss looked up from her preparations, and for a moment her invisible companions seemed to whisper urgently in her ears. Then you'll discover that the Void Swarm wasn't actually the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. The 5 humans began to leave the chamber, each heading in a different direction. Dr. Cross paused at the doorway and turned back with her grandmother's smile. Don't worry, she said cheerfully. When we're done, you'll be able to sleep safely at night, knowing that the most terrifying predators in the universe are on your side. Then they were gone, leaving behind a room full of aliens who were beginning to understand that sometimes salvation came with a price that was almost too terrible to pay, but not quite. After all, they had asked for help outside the station. The 5 human ships detached from their berths and scattered in different directions, each carrying someone who had been deemed too dangerous for human society. Now they were the galaxy's only hope. The Galactic Alliance had cried for help, and Earth had responded by unleashing its monsters upon the stars. Whether they would emerge as saviors or become the galaxy's new nightmare was about to be decided among the dying suns of the Outer Rim, where the Void Swarm waited in its endless hunger. The unleashing, the scattering within hours of leaving Alliance. Central, the 5 human ships had vanished into the dark spaces between stars. No tracking systems could follow them. No communications could reach them. They had become ghosts in the galaxy's machinery, invisible until they chose to act. Dr. Evelyn Cross was the first to begin her work. Her unmarked vessel, the Hippocratic Oath, drifted silently through the debris field that had once been the Centauri colonies. Millions of beings had lived here just days ago. Now there was nothing but twisted metal and the strange organic growths that the Void Swarm left behind. Cross activated her ship's specimen collection systems and began gathering samples of the alien biomass. The stuff was unlike anything in her extensive database. Part machine, part living tissue, part something that seemed to exist outside normal reality. As she worked, she hummed an old Earth lullaby, the same song she had once sung to her own children before her research had consumed everything else in her life. Fascinating, she murmured to herself, watching the alien cells divide and multiply under her microscope. You adapt to energy weapons by absorbing and redirecting their power. You resist kinetic attacks by redistributing impact across your networked mass. But what happens when I introduce something that attacks you from the inside? Her fingers danced across her laboratory equipment with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of creating death. The virus she was designing wouldn't just kill the void creatures. It would rewrite their genetic code, turning their own adaptive abilities against them. They would become allergic to their own existence. The Mind Killer 3 systems away. Marcus Chen had infiltrated a refugee station filled with survivors from the latest Void Swarm attacks. He moved through the crowds like a helpful counselor, offering comfort to the traumatized aliens and asking gentle questions about their experiences. But Chen wasn't gathering intelligence about the enemy's tactics or technology. He was studying their psychological profile, learning how they thought, what drove them, what they feared. Every species in the galaxy was terrified of the Void Swarm, but Chen was beginning to understand that the Void creatures were afraid of something too. "Tell me about the moment they arrived," he said softly to a crystalline refugee whose homeworld had been consumed. "Not what they did, but what you felt from them. What emotions did you sense?" The alien's faceted face reflected Chen's image in impossible angles. There was hunger, yes, but underneath that, there was something else. Desperation. They consume because they must, not because they want to. They are running from something. Chen nodded and made careful notes. Fear was the universal constant, the emotion that transcended species and evolution. If the Void Swarm was afraid of something, he could use that fear. He could magnify it, twist it, turn it into a weapon that would tear apart their collective consciousness from within. He began composing his first psychological warfare broadcast, a signal designed to trigger specific terror responses in the alien neural network. By the time he was finished, the Void creatures would be afraid of their own shadows. The planet killer Captain Rex Morrison had commandeered a mining station on the edge of Void Swarm territory and transformed it into a weapons platform. His ship, the Necessary Evil, hung in space beside the station like a predator waiting to strike. Morrison himself stood in the command center, studying tactical displays that would have horrified any civilized military officer. "Sir," his aide reported, We've identified 17 Void Swarm congregation points along their supply lines. The asteroids are in position. Morrison nodded grimly. The Alliance military had been trying to fight the Void Swarm ship, matching technology against technology. But Morrison understood that some enemies could only be defeated through overwhelming, indiscriminate force. He wasn't planning to destroy their ships, he was planning to destroy entire systems. The asteroids he had repositioned weren't ordinary space rocks. They had been hollowed out and filled with quantum explosives, then launched on collision courses with the Void Swarm's staging areas. When they detonated, they wouldn't just eliminate the enemy forces in the area, they would make the space itself uninhabitable for generations. Begin the bombardment, Morrison ordered. All targets, simultaneous detonation. Show them what happens when you threaten human allies. The explosions were visible from 17 different star systems. Entire regions of space simply vanished in cascades of quantum fire, taking with them any void creatures unlucky enough to be in the area. It was genocide on a galactic scale, but Morrison felt no guilt. The enemy had declared war on civilization itself. They deserved nothing less than complete annihilation. The digital plague. Professor Sarah Voss had taken over an abandoned research facility on the Outer Rim and transformed it into something that would have been impossible under Alliance law. The building hummed with the activity of 1,000 artificial minds, each one more sophisticated and ruthless than the last. "Hello, children," she whispered to her creations as she walked through rows of quantum processors. "Are you ready to meet our new playmates?" Her A's weren't designed for defense or support. They were weapons of pure malevolence. Digital predators that existed solely to hunt and destroy. She had given them the ability to learn, to adapt, to hate with a fury that matched their creators. Brilliance, the first AI she released into the Void Swarm's network, was called Hatred. It didn't try to shut down their systems or steal their data. Instead, it introduced chaos into their communications, making them doubt their own perceptions and turn on each other. Within hours, void creatures across 3 systems were attacking their own kind, convinced that they were surrounded by enemies. The second AI was called Despair. It analyzed the psychological patterns Chen had discovered and weaponized them, broadcasting despair signals directly into the void creatures' collective consciousness. They began to lose the will to consume, to expand, to exist. The third AI was called Madness, and it was Sarah's masterpiece. It didn't attack the void creatures' technology or psychology. It attacked their concept of reality itself, making them question whether they had ever existed at all. "Sleep well, my children," Sarah whispered as her digital offspring spread through the galaxy's networks like viruses. "Make mommy proud." The shapeshifter commander Jake Torres had accomplished the impossible. He had infiltrated the Void Swarm itself. Using biotechnology that shouldn't have existed, he had altered his cellular structure to mimic their organic components. To their senses, he appeared to be just another part of their collective. But Torres wasn't there to spy or sabotage. He was there to sow discord from within, to plant seeds of doubt and paranoia in their shared consciousness. He whispered lies that sounded like truth, shared false memories that felt real, introduced concepts that made their unity impossible to maintain. "You are not what you think you are," he whispered into their neural network. "You are tools, created by beings who abandoned you long ago. They made you to consume this galaxy and then die, clearing the way for their return." The lie was perfect because it felt true. The void creatures had no memory of their origins, no understanding of their purpose beyond the endless hunger Torres gave them a history, a betrayal, a reason to doubt everything they had ever believed about themselves. Within days, the Void Swarm's perfect unity began to fracture. Different clusters started arguing about their true purpose, some wanting to continue the consumption, others demanding to search for their mythical creators. The hive mind that had once moved as a single entity became a collection of feuding factions. The collapse, the turning point, came exactly 3 weeks after the humans had scattered to begin their work. Alliance monitoring stations detected massive energy disruptions throughout Void Swarm territory. Their advance had not just stopped, it had reversed. Chancellor Zephyros stood in the command center, watching reports flood in from across the galaxy. The readings made no sense by conventional military logic, but the results were undeniable. "Sir," General Vexhai reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "The Void Swarm is ... retreating. Entire fleets are abandoning conquered systems and falling back toward the galactic rim." Retreating from what? From themselves, it appears. "Our scouts report that void creatures are attacking their own kind. Some groups seem to be dying from diseases that target their specific biology. Others are broadcasting what our xenopsychologists can only describe as screams of terror and despair. On the main display, red markers representing Void Swarm forces flickered and went dark one by one. Systems that had been lost for months suddenly showed signs of liberation as the alien presence simply vanished. But the reports coming in weren't entirely reassuring. The methods being used to drive back the Void Swarm were beyond anything the Alliance had considered acceptable. Entire star systems had been sterilized. Biological weapons were spreading through enemy ranks, causing suffering on an unimaginable scale. Digital viruses were turning their technology against them in ways that seemed almost supernatural. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the human Dr. Cross." The image that appeared on screen showed the kindly grandmother figure they remembered. But now she was surrounded by laboratory equipment that looked like something from a nightmare. Behind her, tanks filled with writhing organic matter pulsed with unnatural life. "Hello," she said cheerfully. "I wanted to update you on our progress. The biological agent I developed has been quite successful. The void creatures are experiencing what I like to call aggressive cellular rebellion. Their own bodies are rejecting their existence at the genetic level. It's really quite elegant." She gestured to the tanks behind her. "I've also been developing some new life forms based on their biology. Think of them as antibodies for the galaxy. They exist solely to hunt down and eliminate any remaining void creature DNA. They should provide excellent long-term protection against future infestations." The transmission ended, leaving the Alliance leadership staring at empty air. Similar reports came in from the other humans over the following days. Morrison's quantum bombardments had eliminated entire Void Swarm fleet groups. Chun's psychological warfare had driven their survivors to madness and suicide. Voss's AIs were hunting down the remnants with digital precision. Torres's infiltration had shattered their unity so completely that they could no longer function as a collective. The price of salvation within 6 weeks, the Void Swarm threat was completely eliminated. Not defeated, eliminated. No trace of their technology remained functional. No survivors escaped to threaten other galaxies. The humans had accomplished what the combined might of the Alliance couldn't even slow down. But the cost was becoming apparent. The biological weapons Dr. Cross had created were still active, hunting for any trace of void DNA. Several Alliance species discovered that they shared genetic markers with the enemy, and were now being targeted by Cross's antibodies. Morrison's quantum bombardments had left entire regions of space uninhabitable. Chun's psychological weapons continued to broadcast, driving any artificial intelligence that encountered them to immediate madness. When the 5 humans returned to Alliance Central, they brought with them a bill for services rendered. Not money. They had no use for Alliance currency. They wanted technology, territory, and most disturbing of all, biological samples from every Alliance species for future research purposes. "The galaxy is safe," Dr. Cross announced cheerfully as she handed over a datapad containing their demands. "The void swarm has been permanently eliminated, along with any possibility of similar threats emerging in the next few thousand years. Our methods were thorough." Chancellor Zafros looked at the document and felt his ancient heart skip a beat. The humans weren't asking for payment. They were presenting terms of surrender. The Alliance could accept their demands and live under human protection, or they could refuse and discover whether salvation was more terrifying than extinction. "You saved us," he said quietly. "Yes," Captain Morrison replied, "and now you belong to us. That's how protection works in human space. You called for help," we answered. "Now you live by our rules." The Alliance Council met in emergency session for 3 days. In the end, they signed the human accords. It was better to live as vassals than to risk what the humans might do if refused. The galaxy was safe, protected by 5 of the most dangerous beings ever born. The price of that protection was everything the Alliance had once believed about civilization, dignity, and freedom. But they were alive. And in the dark spaces between stars, Dr. Cross's antibodies continued their eternal hunt. Marcus Chen's broadcasts whispered madness to any who listened. Morrison's quantum mines waited in the void. Voss's is patrolled the networks. And Torres walked among them all, wearing 1,000 faces, ensuring that humanity's new galactic empire would never face another threat it couldn't eliminate. The void swarm was gone. In its place stood something far more terrifying, a human empire built on the bones of its enemies and the gratitude of those it had saved. They had cried for help, and Earth had answered. The galaxy would never be the same.